The pile sat there for 60 days before anyone thought to ask the right question. Not how long it would take, not whether the leaves would break down, but what was actually doing the work inside that dark, collapsing heap. Every gardening video on the internet will sell you the same fantasy. That dead leaves turn into gold because of time, because of heat, because of some expensive activator you pour from a bottle. That is a lie, and it is costing you the one thing your soil desperately needs. By the end of this investigation, you will know exactly how to turn a mountain of dry, crackling leaves into black, crumbly humus, using nothing but one ingredient that most people throw straight into the trash. And you will never waste money on another bag of synthetic compost again. Here is the truth that the fertilizer companies do not want you to hear. The process is not about waiting for decay. It is about feeding the army that does the decaying. The leaves are just the battlefield. The secret lives in the biology, in the fermentation, in the millions of microscopic workers that need one specific thing to wake up and start eating. Most gardeners never give it to them, and that is why their leaf piles sit there for an entire winter, cold, dead, and useless, while the neighbor's bin turns into pure gold in a fraction of the time. The difference is not luck, and it is not a miracle. It is a single ingredient, and it has been hiding in your kitchen all along. You know the scene. You rake up a massive pile of autumn leaves. You're proud of yourself. You think you're being smart. You heap them into a corner of the yard. You maybe even turn them once, and then you wait and wait. And 6 months later, you dig into that pile and find nothing. Dry, brittle leaves that crinkle like paper and refuse to become soil. Meanwhile, your neighbor's compost bin steams in the cold morning air, and you have no idea why. If you have ever stood over a pile of leaves that refuse to break down, feeling like the garden just hates you, you know exactly the frustration I am talking about. That pile is not a failure of effort. It is a failure of understanding, and the fertilizer aisle will happily sell you 100 products to fix a problem that has nothing to do with what you are adding. The trap is the belief that decomposition is just a waiting game. It is not. It is an appetite. And that appetite is about to be fed from the most unlikely source in your kitchen, one thing you throw away every week that wakes up the entire microbial army. Make sure you're in the loop for every case file we crack open. Subscribe now so you don't miss the evidence. Right now, drop a word in the comments. The one kitchen scrap you already suspect has hidden power, the thing you've been wasting. But here is the trap. If you bury those leaves whole, or worse, if you just leave them exposed to the air, you will attract every ant within 50 meters, and the pile will sit there mocking you for an entire season. Let me tell you what the old gardener does instead. He does not add a single thing from a store. He walks into his kitchen and he picks up the one ingredient that changes everything. The thing that every source conveniently forgets to mention when they promise you gold in 60 days. The common wisdom says that leaves break down on their own, that all you need is water and time. That is wrong. The chemistry works in the opposite direction. Dry leaves are almost pure carbon, and carbon alone does not rot. It just sits there, stiff and lifeless. What those leaves need is nitrogen, a burst of energy to feed the bacteria that do the actual turning. Without nitrogen, your pile is a museum, not a compost heap. Here is the evidence that changes everything. The microbial process that turns dry carbon into humus requires a fuel source, and that fuel is the one ingredient everyone is throwing away. The old gardener, the one with calloused hands and 100 stubborn seasons behind him, he calls it the starter. He has been using it since before the internet existed, before anyone sold a bag of miracle activators. He never read about it in a manual. He just noticed what the pile needed through trial and error. And the wonderful part is, you already have it in your kitchen right now, sitting at the back of your fridge or in a bowl on your counter. Every single day, you generate this ingredient, and then you either compost it separately or you throw it into the trash where it turns into landfill gas. But here is the part that changes everything. You can teach dead leaves to eat it. You can trick carbon into starving itself, and the faster it eats, the hotter the pile
is not
gets.
Dead, boy.
The old gardener put his
asleep.
hands on his hips and looked at me like I was the slowest student he had ever met. He said, "The pile is not dead, boy. It is asleep. You do not wake a sleeping giant by throwing a blanket over it. You wake it by giving it a meal." That is when he reached into the bucket and pulled out a handful of what looked like dark, crumbled earth. Except it was not earth. It was the remnants of everything his kitchen had produced that week. This is where most gardeners quit, because they think the preparation matters more than the biology. It does not. The first physical action is embarrassingly simple. You take those dry leaves and you shred them. Run a lawnmower over them. Crumble them in your hands. The smaller the pieces, the more surface area the microbes have to work with, and the more surface area, the faster the feast. The old gardener does not bother with a fancy shredder. He just stamps on the pile with his boots. Feel the difference for a second. Whole leaves are stiff, waxy. They resist water like a raincoat. But shredded leaves have broken edges, torn fibers, places where moisture can actually cling and penetrate. When you crush a dry leaf in your fist, you can hear it crackle. That sound is the carbon structure giving up. That is exactly what the microbes need. Access. Breaking the leaves is not the step you can skip.
Come with me through every step
It
I
is
take
the
after
moment
this
the
command,
pile becomes an
because you're going to love
invitation.
what you learn.
The pile is now an invitation, but an invitation only matters if someone shows up. Subscribe and walk with me through every step the old gardener takes after this.
You are.
Because what you feed that shredded carbon next is the difference between a cold heap and a living furnace. In the comments, tell me what you use to shred your leaves, or just drop the word crackle if you finally understand why your pile stayed dead all those years. But you still have not woken anything up yet. Shredded carbon is still just carbon, and the old gardener knows that the meal comes next. He starts by soaking those shredded leaves with water, drenching them until they feel like a wrung-out sponge, not dripping, not flooded, but holding moisture in every torn edge. Then he closes the lid on the watering can, because what comes next is the part that makes everything click. He reaches for his bucket of kitchen scraps, the chopped vegetable peels, the wilted lettuce, the bruised fruit, the coffee grounds from that morning, and he buries that nitrogen-rich material deep inside the leaf pile, like setting a fire in the center of a bonfire. The leaves become the fuel, and the scraps become the spark. He does not spread them on top, where they will attract flies and rot. He pushes them into the heart of the pile, where the heat will build. Here is where the real chemistry kicks in. The kitchen scraps are nitrogen, the fuel that the bacteria need to reproduce and multiply. As they break down, they release heat. The pile starts to steam, and that heat activates the microbes already living on the leaf surface. It is a chain reaction. The nitrogen feeds the bacteria multiply, the multiplication generates heat, and the heat speeds up the decomposition of the carbon. Every piece feeds the next. You still with me? Good, because this next part is the real secret. The old gardener does not just dump the scraps and walk away. He turns the pile every 3 days, and he watches the steam rise off it in the cold morning air. That steam is proof the machine is running. If the pile is not warm to the touch, if you cannot feel the heat radiating from the center when you push your hand in, then you have not fed it enough, or you have not watered it enough. Wait a week, and you will see the transformation begin. The leaves that were stiff and crackling start to darken. They lose their shape. They take on the color of strong tea. Another week, and you cannot even recognize them as leaves anymore. The pile shrinks to half its original size, and the smell shifts from that sharp, musty scent of dry plant matter to the rich, earthy smell of a forest floor after rain. That smell is the signal that the microbes have won. Remember how I said the whole pile would only sit there if you gave it dry leaves alone? Now watch what happens when you give it the kitchen scraps. The center of the pile reaches a temperature that would be uncomfortable to your skin. That is, the bacteria burning through the carbon. The old gardener pushes his hand in and does not flinch because he has done this 1,000 times before. He knows the heat means it is working, and he knows that the process is now unstoppable. This is where most people hesitate, because the pile is actively steaming and smelling of earth, and they think they have done something wrong. They check online. They see warnings about pests, about smell, about rot. But pause and look at what you have actually built. You have a reactor that is converting kitchen waste and dead leaves into the most valuable substance your garden can receive. And you have done it without spending a single dollar. You have done what the chemical companies charge $50 a bag to approximate. The old gardener calls it the gold test. He scoops out a handful from the center of the pile, not from the outside where the dry edges still linger, and he presses it into a ball. If it holds together, if it feels like a dark, crumbly sponge that smells like the earth itself, then the process is complete, faster than any video promised. And here is the detail that will change the way you look at every fallen leaf from now on. This is not just compost. It is a bank. You are the kind of person who can save a plant with trash, not the sucker buying synthetic bags from the gardening center. You collected what everyone else raked into the street. You fed it with what everyone else threw in the bin, and you turned that refuse into something that will feed your tomatoes, your roses, your raised beds all season long. The neighbor who stared at your steaming pile with confusion will be staring at your harvest with something else entirely. That pile is not just compost, it's a bank, and you just made a deposit. Subscribe to keep every scrap's hidden power landing in your feed before the neighbors figure it out. Type black gold in the comments if you're ready to start your own pile tonight. The proof is in the pile itself. The old gardener showed me 2 identical pots of tomato seedlings. One sat in sterile store-bought potting mix, fine enough on its own. The other sat in a mix that was 1/3 of his leaf and scrap harvest. 3 weeks later, the difference was embarrassing. The seedling in the store mix had stretched thin, pale, reaching for light it could not find. The one in his black gold was stocky, dark green, with a stem like a pencil and roots that had filled the pot completely. That is not a claim. It is a consequence of the biology. The humus your pile produces holds water like a sponge, releases it slowly, and feeds the plant in a way that a synthetic chemical solution cannot, because it is alive. It contains the bacteria, the fungi, the microscopic life that your soil desperately needs to break down future organic matter. You're not just feeding the plant, you're teaching the ground how to feed itself. But here is the trap that catches almost everyone who watches the viral videos. They skip the shredding, they dump whole leaves and whole scraps into a bin and walk away, and then they wonder why the pile smells like a swamp and attracts every fly in the city. The old gardener has a word for that. You are feeding the wrong army. Whole leaves smother. They mat together, block air, and the pile turns anaerobic, a slimy, stinking mush instead of the crumbly gold you wanted. Wet kitchen scraps buried too shallow will do the same thing. They will rot instead of fermenting, drawing in pests and turning your beautiful project into something your neighbors complain about. But when you respect the process, when you shred the leaves, drench them, and bury the nitrogen deep inside, the pile does not smell, it steams. It works. And the result is not the slimy failure that keeps people convinced they cannot compost in an urban yard. Now imagine your garden 3 months from now. The plants you grew not with expensive synthetic fertilizer, but with the harvest of your own kitchen and the leaves that fell for free in your own yard. Imagine the dark, crumbly soil that holds together in your fist the rich, earthy scent rising off it, the way your seedlings push up fast, dark, and unstoppable, while the neighbor quietly wonders what changed. The old gardener does not keep every vegetable peel, and neither should you. But the coffee grounds, the crushed eggshells, the fruit skins, the wilted greens, those are not waste. They are the meal that turns dead leaves into gold, and you have been throwing them in the trash this entire time. The next time you watch a video promising you fertile soil in 60 days, remember that the method was never a mystery. It was sitting in your kitchen all along, waiting to be used.